Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. So YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now let's begin. I've been driving deliveries for almost 8 years now, and I'm telling you this because I need someone to know what happened out on that Mesa Road. The run to Station 7 was supposed to be straightforward. Emergency medical supplies and replacement equipment parts for a geology team stationed out near Skull Cliff. The place sits on this massive flat mesa, accessible only by a single dirt road that winds up through the canyon. They'd had an equipment failure and couldn't wait for the regular supply run, so dispatch called me at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Premium rate for the inconvenience. I took it without thinking twice. I left at 4:30, which meant I'd be on that road well before sunrise. The mesa's about 90 miles out, and the last 40 are on that dirt track. Narrow, steep in places, with the canyon dropping off to your right for most of the climb. I'd done it twice before in daylight, never in the dark. The first hour was highway driving, nothing unusual. Coffee from the thermos, classic rock station, fading in and out. When I turned onto the access road, my headlights were the only light source for miles. The sky was that deep pre-dawn black where you can't tell where the land ends and the void begins. I was about 20 minutes up the Mesa Road when I saw him. He was standing maybe 60 feet ahead, just at the edge where my high beam started to fade. A man in what looked like hiking gear, dark jacket, backpack. But here's what made me slow down. He was facing the cliff edge, not walking toward it, not looking around, just standing there perfectly still, staring out into nothing. I eased off the gas. The road was barely wide enough for my truck, and he was close enough to the edge that I'd have to pass within a few feet of him. I tapped the horn, not aggressive, just a light tap to let him know I was there. He didn't move, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. I stopped the truck maybe 30 feet back and left it running. Rolled down my window, called out, "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. The silence out there was total. No wind, no animal sounds, just my engine idling and my voice falling dead in the air. I glanced down at the radio to kill the music just for a second. When I looked up, he was closer. Not walking closer, just closer. Maybe 40 feet now instead of 60. Same exact posture, same stillness, same position facing the cliff. My hand froze on the volume knob. I stared at him, trying to logic it out. Maybe he'd been walking and I just didn't notice in the split second I looked away. Maybe the angle was playing tricks with distance. But I could see the cliff edge in my headlights, and he hadn't moved along it. He'd just repositioned, closer. I put the truck in park, turned on my flashers. I wasn't about to drive past someone who might be in some kind of medical crisis, even if every instinct in my body was starting to whisper that something was very wrong. "Sir, do you need help?" Louder this time. The figure didn't respond. I could see him more clearly now. The backpack was an older style, forest green. His jacket was dark blue or black. His stance was wrong somehow, too rigid, like a mannequin placed at the cliff's edge for some reason I couldn't fathom. I reached for my phone to call it in to dispatch, looked down at the screen for maybe 2 seconds to unlock it. When I looked up, he was at my hood, 10 feet away, same posture, still facing away from me, toward the drop. I didn't see him move. I didn't hear footsteps on the gravel. He was just there, relocated again, and my brain was screaming now, even though I couldn't articulate why. I threw the truck into reverse without thinking, just reacted. My tires spun on the loose dirt for a horrible half second before catching. and I jerked backward maybe 20 feet before slamming the brakes. The figure was gone. Empty road. Nothing at the cliff edge, nothing in my headlights. Just the dark ribbon of dirt stretching up the mesa and the black void beyond the shoulder. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I sat there breathing hard, scanning the area. He had to have gone somewhere. Down the cliff? Into the rocks? There wasn't cover anywhere near where he'd been standing. I looked in my side mirror. Nothing but the dark road behind me and the red glow of my taillights. Then I checked the rear view. He was in my truck bed, standing upright, facing me through the rear window, perfectly still. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He was maybe 4 feet from the back of my head with only the cab wall between us. I could see him clearly in the mirror. He was looking at me now, or at least his head was oriented toward me. I still couldn't make out features. Just the shape of him, the dark bulk of his backpack, the absolute stillness. I didn't remember stopping. I didn't remember hearing anyone climb into the bed. The tailgate was closed. I'd checked it before I left the depot like I always do. My hand moved to the door handle, then stopped, because some animal part of my brain understood that the second I opened that door, the second I broke eye contact with the mirror, he'd be closer. That was the rule. That was how this thing worked. I sat frozen, staring at his reflection. He didn't sway with the idle of the engine, didn't shift his weight. He was locked in place, but the place he was locked to wasn't the truck bed. It was me. Some fixed point in relation to my awareness. Very slowly, keeping my eyes on the rear view, I reached for my phone. I needed proof. I needed someone else to see this. My hand found the phone and I started to lift it, still watching the mirror. My thumb brushed the home button and the screen lit up. The glow pulled my focus for a fraction of a second. When my eyes returned to the mirror, he was pressed against the rear window. His face was an inch from the glass. Still no features I could distinguish, just a dark, wrong blur where a face should be. But I could feel him looking at me. The attention was physical, like pressure on my skull. I made a sound I'm not proud of. Dropped the phone. It clattered into the footwell and the screen went dark. I kept my eyes on the mirror and put the truck in drive. Very carefully, very slowly, I pressed the gas. Started moving forward up the Mesa Road. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't get out. I couldn't go back. The only direction was forward, toward the station, toward other people. He stayed at the window, didn't move relative to me. I drove for what felt like an hour but was probably 5 minutes, and he remained locked in that position, pressed against the glass. I understood with absolute certainty that he wasn't standing in the truck bed at all. He was occupying a coordinate that related to me, not to physical space. The truck was moving. The world was moving. But he was fixed to some point in my personal geometry. I started whispering, praying maybe. I'm not religious, but words came out anyway. Nonsense. Bargaining. My eyes burned from not blinking. I was terrified that if I closed them even for a second, he'd be somewhere worse. Inside the cab, in the passenger seat, in the mirror right behind my shoulder. The sky started to lighten, that blue-gray that comes before dawn. I could see the road better now, and the station compound was visible ahead. 3 prefab buildings and a radio tower on the flat top of the mesa. I drove through the gate, pulled up to the main building, killed the engine. I still hadn't looked away from the rearview mirror. He was still there, still at the window. A researcher came out, probably wondering why I was just sitting in the truck. She walked around to my window, knocked on the glass. "You okay?" I couldn't answer, couldn't point. I just stared at the mirror. She followed my gaze. looked at the truck bed through the rear window, frowned. "What are you looking at?" My voice came out cracked. "You don't see him?" She studied the empty bed, looked back at me with concern. "See who?" I finally broke eye contact with the mirror, turned around to look directly through the rear window with my own eyes, not the reflection. The truck bed was empty. Nothing but the cargo boxes I'd loaded at the depot. When I looked back at the mirror, he was gone from there too. The researcher helped me out of the truck. I was shaking too hard to walk right. She thought I was having a medical episode. Dehydration, maybe a stroke. They checked my vitals, gave me water, made me sit in their break room while they unloaded the supplies. I couldn't explain what happened. Didn't try. I drove back down the mesa at noon, full daylight. Saw nothing. Made it home. Filed my delivery report. Took 2 days off. Went back to work. But here's the thing nobody else knows. When I'm driving now, sometimes I catch something in the rearview mirror, just for a split second when I'm not paying attention. A dark shape in the back seat that shouldn't be there. And the distance feels wrong, like it's closer than it should be for something sitting behind me. I don't look directly anymore. I've learned not to. Because I'm afraid if I confirm it's really there, it'll move to the next position. And I don't know where that position is. I don't know how close it can get before the distance between us runs out completely. I'm a research assistant, geology, mostly grunt work. I spent 3 weeks last September on an unmarked plateau about 40 miles from the south rim, taking soil samples and setting up seismic sensors. The kind of work where you're alone for days at a time, sleeping in your truck, living off protein bars and instant coffee. I'm a pretty rational person, for context. I don't do ghost stories or conspiracy theories. But what happened out there doesn't fit into any framework I understand. The first morning I noticed something was wrong. I'd been there 5 days already. I woke up in my sleeping bag in the truck bed and saw my water bottle sitting on top of my rolled-up jacket, right next to my head. The bottle I'd left wedged between 2 rocks outside the previous night, 30 feet away, because I'd been organizing equipment and didn't want it getting knocked over. I sat there staring at it. The condensation was gone. The outside was dry and clean, even though I remembered it being covered in dust and grit from where I'd set it down. I picked it up. The metal was cool but not cold, like someone had been holding it. My first thought was wildlife. A coyote, maybe. Except coyotes don't unscrew caps and place things gently on fabric, and they sure as hell don't clean anything. I checked the perimeter. No footprints except mine. No tire tracks. The plateau was exposed red rock and thin soil. You'd see tracks if they were there. I was miles from the nearest access road, and I hadn't seen another person since the ranger who'd signed off on my permit. I convinced myself I'd been half asleep when I brought the bottle inside. Autopilot, it happens. 2 nights later, I woke to my headlamp sitting on my chest. Not near me, on me, balanced perfectly on my sternum, the strap coiled in a neat spiral beside it. I knew I'd left that headlamp hanging from the truck's side mirror. I'd used it to check a sensor reading after dark, and I specifically remembered hooking it there because my hands were full. I hadn't touched it since. But here it was, cleaned. The lens had been smudged with red dust, and now it was spotless. Even the strap looked newer somehow, like someone had wiped it down. I didn't move for a long time. Just lay there in the dark with this object resting on my chest, trying to reconstruct the night in my head. Had I gotten up? Sleepwalked? I'm not a sleepwalker, never have been. I started locking my equipment in the truck cab after that. Everything. Sensors, tools, even my boots. I kept the keys on a carabiner attached to my belt loop while I slept. It didn't matter. The next morning, my boots were beside my sleeping bag, laces loosened, tongues pulled forward, arranged in perfect parallel lines. The mud I'd caked into the treads during a scramble down a wash was gone. Someone had cleaned them, not just wiped them, cleaned them. I could see the individual tread patterns, every groove visible. The truck cab was still locked. The keys were still clipped to my belt. I sat there with my knees pulled up, staring at those boots, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic yet. Worse. The slow creeping understanding that the rules I'd been using to explain this weren't adequate. I checked everything. My pack, my samples, my GPS unit. All of it exactly where I'd left it except cleaner. Neater. My field notebook had been lying half open with the pen across the pages. Now it was closed. The pen clipped to the spiral binding. The pages weren't wrinkled anymore. That's when I started talking out loud. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if someone was listening, I could reason with them. I sat in the truck bed in broad daylight and said clearly, I don't need help. I don't want help. Please stop touching my things. My voice sounded small against the wind. Nothing answered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the cab, facing outward, headlamp on, utility knife in my hand. I watched the plateau, the rocks, the scrub brush, the dark. Hours passed. The wind moved through the canyon below, a constant low rush. My eyes burned. I didn't blink more than I had to. At some point, I don't know when, I must have nodded off. Just for a second, maybe a minute. When I jolted awake, there was a blanket over my shoulders. Not my blanket. I didn't own this blanket. It was thick, wool, smelled faintly of cedar, draped across me carefully, tucked slightly around my left side where the wind was coming from. I threw it off like it was on fire, stood up fast enough that my head spun. The blanket crumpled in the truck bed, dark green and heavy and completely foreign. I shouted. Just sound, no words. My throat was raw. The plateau was empty, silent except for the wind. I didn't stay another night. I packed everything in under an hour, threw it all in the cab, didn't bother organizing. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. I never did. On the drive out, I checked the rearview mirror more than the road. The blanket was still in the back. I didn't want to touch it. When I got back to Flagstaff, I threw it in a dumpster behind a gas station and sat in my truck for 20 minutes, watching to make sure no one pulled it out. I filed my data, sent the samples to the lab. My supervisor asked if I'd be willing to go back in December to do a follow-up survey. I said no, didn't explain why. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. Whoever it was, they were trying to help me. That's the part that makes my skin crawl. The care, the attention. They cleaned my things, organized my workspace, brought me a blanket when I was cold. I don't know what's worse, that someone was watching me that closely, or that they thought I needed taking care of. I drive long-haul routes through the Southwest, been doing it for 8 years now. I'm telling you this because what happened last month near the Vermilion Canyon should have been impossible, but I've got the thermal footage to prove I'm not making this up. The mandatory 10-hour break hit me around 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I pulled into one of those gravel turnoffs about half a mile from the canyon rim. Nothing out there but scrub brush and that massive dark drop-off where the land just opens up into nothing. I'd parked there before. It's quiet, no highway noise, perfect for sleeping. I woke up maybe 3 hours later to this sound. Look, I don't know how else to describe it except like wind chimes, but deeper somehow, more resonant. And underneath that, voices. Not singing exactly, more like chanting, but so low I felt it in my chest before I actually heard it. The cab was completely dark. I sat there listening, trying to figure out if it was coming from my radio or maybe another truck passing by, but the highway was empty. The sound was coming from the canyon. I keep a thermal camera mounted on my dash. Bought it after I hit a deer in Montana that I swear appeared out of nowhere. Insurance wrote it off as a legitimate safety expense. I switched it on and the screen lit up with that grainy green and yellow display. At first I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The canyon floor, which should have been cold and empty, was covered in heat signatures. Thousands of them. They were arranged in these perfect lines, moving slowly across the basin in what looked like a procession. My first thought was some kind of gathering, maybe a religious ceremony or something, but we're talking about a canyon that drops 400 feet straight down. There's no road access to the bottom. You'd need climbing gear just to get down there, and even then, why would thousands of people be wandering around in the dark? The chanting got louder. I turned off the truck's engine completely, and in that silence I could hear it clearly, rhythmic, overlapping voices that didn't quite sync up, like they were all following slightly different tempos. The thermal camera showed the heat signatures moving in unison despite that, flowing around invisible obstacles, never breaking formation. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just drive away? Here's why. I couldn't tell if what I was seeing was really down in the canyon or somehow closer. The depth perception on thermal is terrible, and part of me was terrified that if I started the engine, I'd realize those figures weren't in the canyon at all, that they were right outside my cab. I watched for maybe 20 minutes. The figures never stopped moving. They didn't pause, didn't mill around like a real crowd would, just this constant flowing procession across the canyon floor in those precise lines. And the chimes. God, even now I can't figure out what was making that sound. Metal on stone maybe, or something resonating in the rock formations themselves. Around 4:30 in the morning, the sky started to change. Not dawn yet, but that pre-dawn gray where you can just barely start to make out shapes. I kept switching between looking at the thermal display and trying to see down into the canyon with my own eyes. The heat signatures were still there, still moving. Then the first real light touched the far canyon wall. The movement stopped. I don't mean it slowed down or the figures scattered. I mean everything locked into place instantly, like someone hit pause on a video. The thermal camera still showed the heat signatures, but they weren't moving anymore. And as more light spilled into the canyon, I started to see what they actually were. Rock formations, spires and hoodoos and those weird balanced stones you see in desert canyons. The thermal camera was picking them up because they'd retained heat from the previous day, or maybe they were warmer than the surrounding air. I don't know. But here's what I can't explain. I watched them move. For 3 hours, I watched those rock formations walk across the canyon floor in organized lines. I've tried to rationalize it, told myself it was a glitch in the camera, or I was more exhausted than I thought, or maybe there's some geological explanation for rocks appearing to move in thermal imaging. But the chanting was real. I recorded it on my phone. It's still there, 53 minutes of that low, overlapping rhythm, and when I play it back, I can hear things I didn't catch in the moment. Variations in the pitch, like different voices taking turns leading. The sun came up fully around 5:45. Everything looked normal. Just another canyon view, pretty in that stark desert way. I made coffee with my electric kettle, checked my phone for messages, did all the regular morning routine things. But my hands wouldn't stay steady. The recording kept playing in my head even though I'd stopped the audio. I called my dispatcher and told him I was taking a personal day. He wasn't happy, but I couldn't drive. I sat in that turnoff until almost noon, just staring at the canyon, waiting to see if anything would move. Nothing did. The rocks stood exactly where they'd been when the light hit them. Before I finally left, I climbed out of the cab and walked to the canyon rim. I don't know what I was looking for. Evidence, I guess. Some sign that what I'd witnessed was real. The thermal camera footage shows everything I described, but it doesn't prove anything except that rocks retain heat, and I'm bad at understanding thermal imaging. But I found something down there, or at least I think I did. The way the light was hitting the canyon walls, I could see these patterns in the rock strata, long horizontal lines that ran the entire length of the visible canyon. And they were at different heights, like rings marking different levels. It reminded me of growth rings in a tree, except these were in solid rock. I thought about what those rings might represent. Layers of sediment, obviously, built up over millions of years, but the spacing between them wasn't even. Some were close together, others had gaps of what looked like 20 or 30 feet, and I realized I was looking at a record of time, of this canyon getting deeper, year by year, century by century. And then I thought, what if the rocks remember being connected? What if every night in those few hours before dawn they try to move back together? I got back on the highway around 1 in the afternoon. I've been avoiding that route since then, taking longer paths that add 6 hours to my delivery time. My company's going to fire me eventually if I keep this up, but I can't do it. I can't park near that canyon again. The chanting's on my phone. I've played it for 3 people. 2 of them said it just sounds like wind. The third one listened for about 20 seconds, went pale, and asked me to turn it off. She wouldn't tell me what she heard in it. Last week, I got a notification that the thermal camera footage had been backed up to my cloud storage. I thought I'd deleted it. I checked, and it's there. 3 hours and 42 minutes of heat signatures moving across the canyon floor. Right at the end, just before dawn, there's a frame where you can see one of the formations turned toward my truck. Just a slight rotation, but it's there. The camera caught it. I wake up most nights around 2 in the morning now. I can't help it. I just lie there in whatever parking lot or rest stop I've chosen, listening to the dark, wondering if the rocks, wherever I am, are moving too, wondering if this happens everywhere and I just happen to notice it that one night, or if I parked in the one place where the phenomenon is visible. I haul freight cross-country, mostly boring stuff, canned goods, camping supplies, that kind of thing. The Phantom Ranch run was one of my regulars. Twice a month I'd drive to the South Rim transfer point where they'd load my cargo onto mules for the trip down to the ranch at the canyon floor. I'd wait at the staging area, do my paperwork, then head out. Simple job. Good pay. Never had a problem. This was late September, maybe 2 in the morning. I'd arrived early and the mule handlers weren't due until 4, so I was killing time in my cab, listening to some talk radio show about Bigfoot or whatever. The staging area sits right at the rim, just a dirt lot with some lights and a covered platform where they sort the supplies. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and a 1,000-foot drop. I stepped out to stretch my legs. It was dead quiet up there. No wind, no insects. Just that heavy silence you get in remote places. I walked to the edge of the lot where the ground slopes toward the rim, lit a cigarette, and that's when I heard it. Help me. A woman's voice, clear as anything, not echoing, not distant, like she was standing maybe 30 feet away in the dark. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone behind me. Nobody there. Just my truck and the empty staging area under those yellow lights. "Hello?" I called out. "Nothing," I figured maybe a hiker had wandered off trail, gotten turned around in the dark. It happens. I walked back toward the platform, checking the shadows, but the place was deserted. I pulled out my phone to call the ranger station. That's when I heard it again. "Help me, please." This time I could tell it was coming from beyond the rim, from down in the canyon. But that didn't make sense because the voice sounded close, intimate almost, like she was speaking right into my ear. I walked back to the edge, shined my phone light into the dark, but I couldn't see anything except the faint outline of rocks dropping away into nothing. "Where are you?" I shouted into the canyon. My voice bounced back at me a second later, flat and wrong-sounding, but there was no response from her. I called the ranger station, got a guy named Martinez who sounded half asleep. I told him what I'd heard, and he sighed like I'd just admitted to being drunk. "Sir, the canyon does funny things with sound," he said. "You probably heard someone talking at one of the campgrounds a mile away. It can travel strange down there." It sounded like she was right next to me. Acoustic phenomenon. We get calls about it all the time. People think they hear voices screaming, you name it. It's just echoes playing tricks. I wanted to believe him. I told him, "Okay, thanks," and hung up. But I kept standing there at the rim, listening. The silence felt different now, heavier, like something was waiting. Then I heard my name. Alan. Not shouted, spoken softly, clearly. From down in that impossible darkness, my hands went cold. I hadn't told anyone my name. The mule handlers knew me, sure, but they weren't here yet. Martinez didn't know my name. I just said I was a driver at the transfer point. Alan Price. Full name now. Still that woman's voice, still sounding close, but definitely coming from below, way below. I backed away from the rim. My rational mind was trying to work it out. Maybe someone down at Phantom Ranch had a radio. Maybe they were screwing with me somehow. But my body wasn't listening to my rational mind. My body wanted to get in the truck and drive. "Alan, please, I need help." There was something off about the way she said please. The intonation was wrong, like someone trying to remember how the word should sound. "I should have left right then. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just get in my truck and go? Here's why. Because part of me kept thinking it was real, that some woman was trapped down there, hurt, and I was the only one who could hear her because of some weird acoustic thing with the canyon. The idea of driving away and finding out later that someone died while I ran, scared. I couldn't do it. So I called Martinez again. "It's still happening," I said. She's saying my name now, my full name. Silence on the other end. Then, "Say that again." She knows my name. Alan Price. She keeps saying it. "Stay where you are. I'm coming up." He arrived maybe 15 minutes later in a ranger truck. Young guy, Latino, with this careful expression like he was approaching a mental patient. He had a flashlight and a radio, and he walked straight to the rim without saying much to me. "I haven't heard it since I called you," I said. He nodded, sweeping his flashlight across the canyon. "Sometimes people camp in unauthorized spots. Could be someone down on one of the ledges. How would they know my name?" He didn't answer that, just kept looking. We stood there together for maybe 5 minutes. Nothing. Just wind now, slight breeze moving through, and Martinez was starting to get that look like he'd wasted his time. Then it came back. Allie. I felt my legs go weak. Had to put my hand on the truck bed to steady myself. Martinez turned to me. "What?" She just said, "Allie, I didn't hear anything." "You didn't hear that?" He shook his head, watching me now instead of the canyon. Allie was what my mother called me when I was a kid. Not Al, not Alan. Allie. She was the only person who ever used it. She died when I was 16. Nobody alive knows that name. I never told anyone. It wasn't in any records. It was just this private thing between us. "Allie, why won't you help me?" Martinez was staring at me. "Sir, are you okay? You look... You really didn't hear that?" "I don't hear anything except wind." The voice came again, but different now. Flatter. Less human somehow. "Allie, Allie, Allie." Repeating it like a recording. Same inflection each time. And I realized, God, even now telling this makes my hands shake. I realized it wasn't asking for help anymore. It was testing the name, trying it out, like it was learning. I got in my truck, told Martinez I was leaving, that he could handle the mule transfer or cancel it or whatever. He tried to stop me, said something about filing a report, but I was already backing out. As I drove away from the rim, I heard it one more time through my open window. Not Allie anymore. It was my mother's voice. Exactly her voice. The way she sounded when I was 8 years old, calling me in for dinner. "Allie, come here. It's time." I haven't been back to the canyon since. I requested different routes and my dispatcher didn't ask why. Martinez filed some kind of incident report. I got a call from a park psychologist offering counseling services, which I declined. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. The canyon's more than a mile deep in some places. Sound doesn't work like that. It doesn't carry a whisper up through 1,000 feet of open air and make it sound like someone's standing next to you. And it definitely doesn't learn your dead mother's voice in the space of an hour. I've been an electrical contractor for 8 years, and I've worked every kind of site you can imagine. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I deal in voltage and circuits and things I can measure. The Canyonlands job came through in early March after one of those freak spring storms that hit southern Utah. The Park Service needed emergency lighting installed along a section of rim trail where the old system had been completely torn out. Solar units with motion sensors, 12 of them spaced along a 2-mile stretch. Simple work, decent pay, and I had a gap in my schedule. I told them I'd have it done in 3 days. The thing about Canyonlands is the scale. Standing on the rim, you're looking across a void that doesn't feel real. The opposite wall is 10, sometimes 15 miles away depending on where you are, and the canyon floor drops nearly 2,000 feet straight down. Your brain knows there's distance there, but it doesn't process it right. It looks like you could throw a rock and hit the far side. I finished the installation by 4:30 on the second day, ahead of schedule. The sun was already dropping, turning everything orange and red. I should have packed up and driven the hour back to Moab. That's what I tell myself now. But the Park Service required documentation that every unit was operational at dusk, when the motion sensors would actually trigger. So I stayed. By 6:15, I was alone. The parking area had emptied out. Last Ranger patrol had passed through, and I had the whole rim to myself. I'd tested 11 of the 12 lights, walking the trail with my checklist, triggering each sensor and confirming the LED arrays kicked on properly. The last unit was at the furthest point, where the trail curves around a promontory and the canyon opens up into this massive amphitheater of stone. I approached the sensor range just as the sun touched the horizon. The light snapped on, bright and clean, throwing a cone of white LED light out over the rim. These weren't subtle guide lights. They were high-output emergency arrays meant to illuminate the trail in total darkness. The beam reached out maybe 60 feet before it diffused, but with the canyon's darkness as a backdrop, you could see where it pointed. That's when I saw him. Directly across the canyon, standing on the opposite rim, there was a man. Not near the edge, but right at it. Dead center in my light's beam, like he'd positioned himself specifically to be seen. Even from that distance, and I'm talking miles here, I could make out his shape. Dark clothes, completely motionless, facing toward me. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, just staring. My first thought was another hiker, but that didn't make sense. There was no trail over there, no access point for miles, and the positioning was too perfect, too centered in the light. I waved. Stupid, I know, but it's what you do when you see someone. He didn't wave back, didn't move at all. I stepped out of the sensor range and the light clicked off. The canyon plunged into near total darkness, just the last purple traces of sunset on the horizon. I counted to 10, then stepped back into range. The light came on. He was gone. I actually laughed. Relief, mostly. Obviously, I'd been looking at a rock formation, a weird trick of shadows and distance. The human brain sees faces in everything. I checked my clipboard, marked the final light as operational, and turned to head back. Then I stopped. Something made me look again. I stepped out of range. Light off. Waited 5 seconds this time. Stepped back. The man was there again. Same position, same stance, directly in the beam. My hands went cold. I backed up quickly, letting the light shut off, and pulled out my phone. No service, but the camera still worked. I moved back into range, got the light on, and raised my phone to take a picture. Through the screen, I could see him clearly. Too clearly. The phone's zoom showed details that shouldn't have been visible at that distance. A dark jacket, pale hands at his sides, and his face. I lowered the phone. My hands were shaking badly enough that I couldn't keep the image steady. When I raised it again, I made myself look. His face was turned toward me, but I couldn't make out features. Just the pale oval of it angled in my direction. I took the picture. The flash went off even though I'd thought it was disabled, a brief strobe that seemed to hang in the air. In that split second of illumination, I saw something that didn't make sense. The man wasn't just far away. He was wrong somehow. The proportions weren't right, or the way he stood wasn't natural, or something I couldn't name. The light shut off. I'd stepped back without realizing it. I stood in the darkness, breathing hard, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. The photo. I could check the photo. That would show me what was actually there. But I didn't open my camera roll. I just stood there with the phone in my hand, screen glowing against the dark. Here's what I did next, and I know how it sounds. I stepped forward again, deliberately. Let the motion sensor trigger. He was closer, not by much, maybe 100 yards. Still on the opposite rim, still centered in the beam, but definitely closer than before. And I could see now that his stance was slightly different. His arms weren't quite at his sides anymore. They were raised a little, bent at the elbows, hands turned outward, like he was reaching across the distance. I backed up fast and the light died. In the sudden darkness, the canyon seemed to press in around me. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, nothing. I didn't step forward again right away. I tried to think it through. The rational explanations. Heat shimmer off the rocks, creating mirages. My own exhaustion after 2 days of physical work. Some kind of reflection or atmospheric phenomenon specific to canyons at sunset. All of those felt thin, but I held on to them anyway. Then I heard something, a sound from across the canyon. It shouldn't have been possible. The distance was too great, the void too vast for sound to carry like that. But I heard it clearly. A single word drawn out and distorted like it had traveled through water. My name, not Eric. My last name, Vaughn. Pronounced perfectly, but with something off in the tone. Too flat, too precise. I ran. No thought, no hesitation. I grabbed my tool bag and ran back down the trail toward the parking area. The motion sensors I'd installed picked me up as I passed, lights snapping on in sequence, creating a bright trail through the darkness. I remember thinking I should turn them off, shut the whole system down, but I didn't stop. I reached my truck and threw the tools in the bed, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting the door unlocked. When I finally started the engine and the headlights came on, I looked at the rear-view mirror. All 12 lights along the trail were on, every single one, glowing bright in a perfect line behind me. Motion sensors only stayed triggered for 3 minutes max. I'd installed them myself. I knew the specifications. I'd been off that trail for less than 90 seconds. I drove until I hit cellular service, then pulled over at a gas station outside Moab. The parking lot lights felt like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I sat there for an hour, trying to calm down enough to drive the rest of the way home. I checked the photo eventually. Had to. The screen showed the canyon rim, the rock formations, the last traces of sunset. No man, no figure. Just empty space where he'd been standing. But when I zoomed in on the spot right at the edge of the beam's reach, there was something. A smudge in the image, like the camera had tried to focus on something and couldn't quite capture it. A blur shaped vaguely like a person, and in the metadata, the GPS coordinates placed the photo's location not where I'd been standing, but across the canyon, where he'd been. The Park Service called 2 days later asking why I hadn't submitted the final documentation. I told them the last light was operational, but I hadn't gotten a clear photo. They said they'd send their own crew to verify. I didn't warn them. What would I even say? I kept the photo for a week before deleting it. Couldn't stand opening my camera roll and seeing it there. But sometimes, late at night, I still remember what I noticed right before I ran. The way his hands were positioned, reaching out across the canyon, the angle of his arms. He wasn't waving or beckoning. He was holding something, gripping something invisible stretched between us, like a rope or a thread, something I couldn't see, but he could feel. I'm Sam Morris, 43, retired Army after 20 years. I'm a pretty rational person, had to be in my line of work. 3 months ago, I moved into my grandmother's house after she passed. It's in Millbrook, the same town where I grew up before my parents moved us to Florida when I was 12. The house needed work, but it was paid off. And after 2 decades of moving from base to base, I wanted something permanent, something quiet. The street, Cordell Avenue, is old. Houses from the 30s and 40s, all similar builds, narrow lots, big windows facing the street. What caught my attention first wasn't anything sinister, it was the curtains. Every single house had these heavy, dark red curtains, same color, same style, thick fabric that hung perfectly straight, covering every window that faced the street. My grandmother's house had them too, though they'd faded to a kind of rust color over the years. I'd been meaning to replace them with something lighter. The thing was, they never moved. Not with wind, not when someone walked past a window inside. I noticed it one afternoon while I was replacing the mailbox post. High winds that day, branches whipping around, loose shingles rattling, but every curtain on the street hung like it was painted on. I stood there with my drill in hand, watching Mrs. Alvarez's house across the street. Her curtains didn't even flutter. I mentioned it to the guy at the hardware store when I went in for weather stripping. He got this odd look on his face, then told me he doesn't deliver to Cordell Avenue anymore. Didn't explain why. Just rang up my purchase and turned to help someone else. 2 weeks later, I met Mr. Peterman. He knocked on my door around 8 in the evening. I'd been watching a game, and when I opened the door, this elderly man, had to be pushing 90, was standing there in a cardigan despite it being late September and still warm out. His expression was stern, almost angry. "You're Helen's grandson," he said. Not a question. I confirmed it, introduced myself properly. He didn't offer his hand. "I live 4 doors down. Your grandmother and I had an understanding about the curtains. I need to make sure you understand it too." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just waited. "Never open those curtains after sundown. Not a crack. Not to look out. Not for any reason." He leaned forward slightly, and I could see his hands were shaking. "Your grandmother knew. Everyone on this street knows. You open those curtains at night, you'll understand why we don't." I asked him what he meant. What would happen? "You'll see what's really out there," he said. "What's always been out there. The curtains aren't for privacy, son. They're for protection." Then he left, walked back down my porch steps and up the sidewalk, disappeared into the darkness between streetlights. I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, trying to process what he'd said. I checked. Every other house had their curtains drawn tight. No light leaked around the edges. It was like looking at a street full of sealed boxes. Here's the thing. I'm not someone who responds well to unexplained rules. 20 years in the military teaches you to follow orders, sure, but it also teaches you to assess threats rationally. An old man telling me not to open curtains wasn't a threat I could categorize, so 2 nights later I opened them. It was past midnight. I'd been unable to sleep, kept thinking about those curtains and Mr. Peterman's warning. I sat in my grandmother's old recliner in the dark living room, staring at the heavy fabric covering the front window. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I got up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. Just 6 inches, just enough to look out. The street was empty. Nothing moved. The sodium vapor streetlights cast their orange glow on the pavement, and I could see every parked car, every mailbox, every front yard clearly. Nothing unusual. Then I looked at the other houses. Every window that faced the street was illuminated from behind, not bright, but enough to make the curtains glow faintly in the darkness. And behind each curtain, there were shapes, not people. The proportions were wrong. At Mrs. Alvarez's house, directly across from me, something tall and angular moved slowly behind her living room curtain. It would have been 8, maybe 9 feet tall if it was standing upright, but it seemed to fold in the middle, bending at an impossible angle. The shadow it cast on the curtain was too dark, too defined, like it was pressed right against the fabric. 2 houses down, behind the Harper's window, something low and wide moved in a smooth, gliding motion from one side to the other. No legs, just a mass that shifted position without the walking motion you'd expect from a person or animal. I counted 4 different windows with movement behind the curtains. Each shape was distinct. Each moved in its own particular way, and none of them looked remotely human. My hands were shaking. I stood there holding my grandmother's curtain open, unable to move, unable to look away. Then the shape at Mrs. Alvarez's window stopped moving. It stayed perfectly still for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then it pressed forward, and I saw the curtain deform as something on the other side pushed against it. Not hands. The bulge in the fabric was too large, too irregular. I let the curtain drop and stepped back from the window. My breath was coming in short, shallow pulls. I backed all the way to the hallway before I could make myself stop moving. Nothing happened. No sound from outside. No knock at the door. I stood in my dark hallway for 20 minutes before I could convince my legs to carry me back to the bedroom. The next morning, I saw Mrs. Alvarez getting her mail. She looked normal, human. She waved at me and I waved back. That afternoon, I walked to Mr. Peterman's house and knocked. He answered, took one look at my face and nodded slowly. "You opened them," he said. I admitted I had. "And now you know why we keep them closed." He started to shut the door, then paused. "Your grandmother lived here 60 years and never opened them at night. Not once. You'd do well to follow her example." I wanted to ask him what they were, where they came from, how long they'd been there, but he closed the door before I could form the questions. That was 6 weeks ago. I keep the curtains closed now. Every night at sunset, I check every window in the house to make sure they're drawn tight. I don't look outside after dark. I've stopped turning on the living room lights in the evening because I don't want them to think I'm awake, watching, aware. 3 nights ago, I heard something outside my bedroom window around 2 in the morning. A soft sound, like fabric dragging across siding. My bedroom's on the 2nd floor. The curtains were closed, but I could see the faint orange glow from the street light leaking around the edges. Something moved between the window and the light. The glow dimmed for several seconds as something passed by outside, blocking it. My bedroom's on the 2nd floor. I haven't slept well since then. I keep thinking about what Mr. Peterman said. The curtains aren't for privacy. They're for protection. Protection from what's outside, or protection for what's outside from seeing in. And if everyone else on this street has those things in their houses behind their curtains, then what exactly am I protecting myself from? I found something yesterday while cleaning out my grandmother's attic. A box of old photographs, and beneath them, a handwritten note on yellowed paper. Just one sentence in my grandmother's careful script. "The curtains stay closed because we made a promise, and they keep their promises too." I don't know what promise she meant. I'm going to tell you this because I need someone else to know what happened, even if it doesn't make sense. I'm a construction foreman, 43. Been doing this work for 20 years. I'm the guy who shows up, gets the job done, goes home. Not exactly the type who sees things that aren't there. Last October, my crew and I were up on the South Rim Visitor Center doing a routine roof repair. 5 of us total, all guys I'd worked with before. The job was straightforward. Replace some damaged flashing, reseal a few seams. We'd done a dozen jobs like it. The only thing different about this one was the location. When you're working on a roof at the Grand Canyon, the view kind of becomes part of your day whether you want it to or not. What I didn't expect was the silence. I mean, we weren't being quiet. We had circular saws going, pneumatic nailers, the generator running. The noise was constant and loud enough that we had to shout to hear each other. But here's what got strange. None of that sound carried across the canyon. We'd look out at the North Rim maybe 10 miles away and watch hikers moving along the trails over there. We could see them clearly through binoculars during breaks. But our tools, all that mechanical screaming, it just died in the air, never reached the other side. Tommy, one of my guys, he's got a physics degree he never uses, explained it to us on day 2. Something about air pressure differentials and the way wind moves through the canyon. The sound waves get trapped or redirected or something. I don't remember the exact words. Point is, it made sense. The canyon was too big. The air pattern's too complex. Sound doesn't travel the way you'd expect. We tested it. Marcus had this air horn he kept in his truck for football games. He stood at the rim during lunch and blasted it toward the North Rim for a solid 10 seconds. We watched through the binoculars. A couple over there didn't even turn around. The sound just vanished into all that empty space. It became this weird joke among us. Tommy started calling the North Rim the silent side, like it existed in some separate dimension where sound couldn't reach. We'd be cutting metal or hammering and someone would point across and say, "They can't hear us over there." We could be screaming and they'd never know. That was on a Wednesday. Thursday afternoon, around 2:30, we were working on the south-facing slope of the roof. I was kneeling by the ridge line. Marcus and Tommy were 20 feet to my left. Devon and Kyle were around the corner on the east section. The generator was running. Kyle's nail gun was going in rapid bursts. That quick pneumatic punch you hear on every construction site. Then every machine shut off at once. Not died, shut off. Like someone hit a master switch. The generator kept running but made no sound. Kyle's nail gun kept cycling but went silent. Even the wind stopped. I don't mean it died down. I mean it stopped existing. The air went completely still in a way that felt deliberate. Marcus looked at me. His mouth was open like he was about to say something, but I could see him decide not to. We all just stood there in this impossible quiet, and I remember thinking how wrong it felt. You don't realize how much sound is always present until it's gone completely. No birds, no distant traffic from the parking lot, no wind, nothing. That's when we heard the scream. It came from the North Rim, clear and immediate, like someone was standing 50 feet away instead of 10 miles. A man's voice, I think, though it was hard to tell because of how it sounded. Raw and sharp and cut off suddenly like something had stopped it mid-breath. Not an echo, not distant. Right there, bouncing off the opposite wall and hitting us straight on. The sound broke something. I felt it in my chest, this physical wrongness that made my lungs seize up. Devon dropped his drill and I heard it clatter on the roof tiles, which meant sound was back, though I hadn't noticed the transition. Everything was normal again. Generator humming, wind moving, the usual ambient noise of the world functioning. But we'd all heard it. Nobody said anything for maybe 30 seconds. Then Marcus walked to the edge of the roof and stared across at the North Rim. I joined him. We had the binoculars, but I didn't reach for them right away. My hands wouldn't steady. "That didn't echo," Tommy said behind us. His voice was thin. "That's not how echoes work. The delay was wrong. It was too immediate." "Maybe it wasn't from over there," Kyle offered, but we all knew he didn't believe it. I finally grabbed the binoculars and scanned the North Rim trails. Took me a minute to find anyone. When I did, I saw a couple hiking together near the rim edge, moving at a normal pace. A solo hiker farther north. A group of 4 sitting on some rocks, eating lunch. Everyone looked fine. Nobody running, nobody clustered around an emergency. Just a normal October afternoon at the Grand Canyon. "Do you see anything?" Marcus asked. I lowered the binoculars. People hiking. Nobody seems hurt. So where did it come from? I didn't have an answer. We stood there looking across at that silent rim, and I became aware of how exposed we were. 10 miles is nothing when sound can suddenly cross it like a straight line. If something over there could make us hear it, what else could it do? We packed up early that day, told the site manager we'd hit a material delay, which was a lie, but none of us wanted to say the real reason. I remember driving home and catching myself checking the rearview mirror more than usual, though I don't know what I expected to see. That night I looked up acoustic anomalies in the Grand Canyon, found some stuff about temperature inversions and sound channels, rare atmospheric conditions that can carry sound across impossible distances for brief periods. It almost made me feel better. Almost. But here's the thing I can't let go of. When that scream came across, every single piece of our equipment went silent first, like something wanted to make sure we'd hear it clearly, like the silence was preparation. We finished the job the next day, worked fast, didn't take breaks near the rim. None of us talked about it again, but I could tell everyone was listening the whole time, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I haven't been back to the South Rim since. Got a call last month about another repair job there, and I turned it down, made up an excuse about being booked. The guy on the phone asked if I could recommend another crew, and I almost warned him, almost said something about what we heard. But what would I even say? That the canyon stops being silent sometimes, and when it does, you hear things you're not supposed to. I still think about those hikers I saw through the binoculars, walking around like nothing happened. Maybe nothing did happen to them. Maybe whatever screamed wasn't on the North Rim at all. Maybe it was in the canyon itself, down in all those shadows we can't see from the rim, and it just chose that moment to make sure we knew it was there. I'm a security guard. Nothing glamorous. I work nights at the Mather Point Visitor Center on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. During the off-season, the place is completely unmanned after 5 p.m. My job is to sit in the security office, watch the cameras, and make sure nobody breaks in to steal souvenirs or vandalize the exhibits. It's boring work. The kind where you bring a thermos of coffee and a book and try not to fall asleep before your shift ends at 6 a.m. The first time I saw them, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks. It was around 2 in the morning, maybe 3 weeks into the job. I'd stepped outside for some air because the office gets stuffy, and I was standing on the observation deck with my flashlight, just looking out into all that darkness. The canyon at night is something else. No moonlight reaches the bottom. It's just this massive void, and your brain sort of fills it in with static. But that night I saw movement, way down deep, little points of light maybe, or pale shapes. I couldn't tell. They were too far away to make out clearly, and they disappeared when I tried to focus on them directly. I figured it was headlamps from some idiot hikers who'd gotten stuck on the trails after dark. It happens more than you'd think. I reported it in my log. Search and rescue checked the trails the next morning. Nothing. It happened again 4 nights later. Same time, same general area. Those little movements in the dark far below. This time I watched them for maybe 10 minutes. They seemed to be following the slope down toward the river, but they weren't on any trail I recognized. The movement was too smooth, too coordinated. I tried to convince myself it was wildlife. Bighorn sheep maybe, or elk. But the pattern was wrong. Animals don't move like that. I stopped reporting it after the 3rd time. The rangers already thought I was seeing things. One of them joked that I was spending too much time alone in the dark. He wasn't wrong, I guess. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was actually down there. Here's the thing. I started looking forward to it. Not in a good way. More like the way you can't stop touching a loose tooth with your tongue. Every night around 2 a.m. I'd go outside with my flashlight and scan the canyon waiting. Most nights I saw nothing, but maybe once or twice a week there'd be that movement again, those shapes. Always deep in the canyon, always heading down slope. I never told anyone I was watching for them on purpose. 3 months in, I brought binoculars, high-powered ones I borrowed from my brother-in-law who's into bird watching. I thought maybe I could finally get a clear look, figure out what the hell I was seeing, confirm it was just shadows and rocks and my brain making patterns out of nothing. I waited on the deck for 2 hours that night. My coffee went cold. The wind picked up around midnight, that dry scraping sound it makes when it moves through juniper and pinon. I was about to give up when I saw them again, closer to the rim this time, maybe a mile down. I raised the binoculars. At first I couldn't get them in focus. The magnification was too strong, and my hands were shaking from the cold. But then I steadied myself against the railing and adjusted the lens. They were people, Not hikers, not rangers, just people, walking in a line down the slope. Their clothes were pale, white or light gray, and they moved in perfect synchronization. Same stride length, same pace. No one was talking or using headlamps. They just walked. I counted maybe 30 of them before the line disappeared behind a ridge. My hands were shaking worse when I lowered the binoculars. I went back inside and sat in the security office with all the lights on until dawn. I didn't write anything in the log. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it. Some kind of religious group doing a pilgrimage, or a survival training exercise. But at 2 a.m, in the off-season, on terrain that would kill you if you missed a step, and why would they all be dressed the same? I should have requested a transfer, or at least told someone, but I didn't. I kept going back outside every night, watching. 2 weeks ago it happened. I was on the deck at the usual time, clear night, no moon. I had the binoculars ready, but I was mostly just standing there, waiting. The wind had died completely. The silence in the canyon at night is so deep it makes your ears ring. Then I saw the light. Someone down there had turned on a flashlight, a strong one. The beam swept across the canyon floor, maybe 2 miles down, and it lit up the slope like a searchlight. There were hundreds of them. Not 30, not 50. Hundreds. Maybe more. They covered the entire slope from the ridgeline down to the river, all dressed in those pale clothes, all moving in perfect unison, flowing downhill like water, silent. Not a single person stumbled or broke formation. They just walked. The flashlight beam held steady for maybe 5 seconds, long enough for me to see the sheer scale of it, long enough for my brain to understand that what I was seeing couldn't be explained away as hikers or training exercises or religious groups. Then the light went out. The movement didn't stop. I could still see them. Hundreds of pale shapes in the darkness, continuing their migration down toward the river. I watched through the binoculars until they disappeared into the shadows near the water. It took almost an hour. The whole time, not one of them made a sound. Not one of them used a light again. When they were gone, I went back inside. My shift ended at 6. I clocked out, drove home, called in sick the next night, and the night after that. I went back to work on the 3rd night because I needed the paycheck. My supervisor asked if I was feeling better. I said yes. I haven't gone outside during my shift since then. I stay in the security office with the door locked and the blinds closed. I watch the cameras. I drink my coffee. I pretend I'm somewhere else. But I can feel them down there. Every night around 2 a.m., something changes in the air. The silence gets deeper. The darkness feels heavier. I know they're moving. I know they're walking that perfect formation down to the river. I know that if I went outside and looked, I'd see them again. Last week, I found something on one of the exterior cameras, the ones that face the canyon. At 2:17 a.m., there's a single frame where the motion sensor triggered. The image is too dark and too far away to make out details, but there's a pale shape at the very bottom of the frame, just one, standing at the rim, looking up. I deleted the footage. Nobody else needs to see that, but I can't delete it from my head. I put in my 2 weeks' notice yesterday. 6 more shifts, and I'm done. But every night I sit in that office, I wonder if that shape is still out there, if it's been watching me this whole time, if it knows I saw them.